Hi everyone, I'm the artistic director of the Southampton Playhouse, Eric Cohn, and I am very happy and excited to be joined today by Dean Fleischer Camp, the director of Lilo and Stitch. So, before we talk about Lilo, your last film, Marcel the Shell, was a super charming and super lo-fi kind of animated movie. So, just how big of a step was it to go from something like that to Lilo and Stitch?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty huge step up in terms of scope and scale and budget and all of that. But it was, I mean, I certainly was daunted by the task. Also, it's a bit of a different task to try to lovingly adapt something, especially if you hold it in as high a regard as I do the original Lilo and Stitch. But I was pretty relieved when, like, second day on set, it dawned on me that, like, oh, it's just the same exact job. It's the same job that I've been doing since I was like 14 with my high school friends shooting music videos. It's just that you have like 200 more people standing around helping you. So that was a relief to feel like, oh, it is, I know what I'm doing here. But Marcel in particular, like, really helped in terms of just not just the technical side, but also sort of like the tonal balance. I realized part of the reason that I wanted to make this movie is that I felt like on the surface they look really different, but Stitch and Marcel are actually like have a ton in common because they're these like wackadoo, unusual protagonists who are like trying to find their place in this world that was not made for them, that they're strangers in. And because of that, even though they're so charming and cute and cuddly and funny, they have this like deep well of sadness to them. And so it seemed like a great something familiar and also something new and challenging.
Well, one of the things that I thought was fascinating about Marcel was the way you shot it almost documentary style, and you had improv, you had the actors on set doing voices. How different was it this time in terms of the way that you worked with the animated sequences and incorporated performances into that?
I tried to go about it in much the same way, and it sort of is just the way that I know how to direct. I come originally like from editing, and so I am very comfortable with doing lots of rolling takes, meaning you don't call action and cut, just with the scripted lines. When those end, you kind of just keep the cameras rolling, and then I can be a director who is talking to the actors while we're shooting, and that allows for, especially when you're working with like a really young kid or a non-professional actor, it allows them to eventually get so comfortable that the cameras disappear to them and they can just focus on embodying the character. And so I tried to bake into Lilo and Stitch and into our footage, not the same, obviously. Like you said, Marcel has this whole conceit where like the whole thing is a quote unquote documentary created by one of the characters. Lilo and Stitch is not like that. It's a more traditional movie narrative that way, but I still tried to always bake into our footage a sense of exploration and improv and all those things that I really like to sink my teeth into.
Any examples that you're really proud of in the movie?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think there's like probably all of my favorite moments are moments that were either like improvised by someone or unexpected in some way to me, or they were something that like I just had an idea while we were shooting and you know yelled it out, called it out, or whatever. One of my favorite examples of it in the film is you've seen it, Eric? Have you seen it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. One of my favorite examples is the water gun fight between Lilo and Stitch. That is like almost completely made in the edit in a sense. There's a scripted scene, obviously, where Lilo's trying to get Stitch to come back to the table and he sprays her with a water gun, but that was pretty much it. And we had oftentimes Stitches embodied on set by this amazing, brilliant acting coach named Sarah Arrington, who was working with Maya, and who plays Lilo. And so I was just having them. It just felt really stilted, and the lines were really feeling stale and memorized. And also Maya was sort of anticipating when the spray was going to happen, so it just felt bad, and so I just let the cameras roll and basically talked them through like an improvisation scenario, saying like, okay, Maya, you're gonna like stay in character. And that's the other thing, if you teach kids what improv is, like that concept, they're incredible at it because they have a much more vibrant imagination than we do, and they just sink right into it, and it comes so naturally. Maybe that's also this generation of kids who's grown up with cameras around them. But so I gave them sort of an improv task and gave her a goal. And Maya, you're trying to get Stitch to come back to the table. Sarah, you're Stitch, and you're really excited about this new gun that you found. And so that was partly just them, you know, having a like improv session. But then later in the edit, because Stitch obviously doesn't exist in real life, I had to find vocalizations that would work with that new idea, which was not real. I don't think it was scripted like that at all. The whole back and forth between them. And I love that scene because it feels like so undeniably real. It feels like Lilo is really interacting with something. And I love that they seem to have this like shorthand where it's the first time that Stitch starts speaking in Tantalog, and Lilo doesn't even bat an eye. She just like goes, she almost seems to understand it intuitively. And she's like, no, put it down, And so, yeah, I just love it combined two things that I love. One being improvisation, which if you can do it in a movie that requires all of this sort of like technical infrastructure and overlays in order to be fully realized. Same with Marcel. That stuff, every extra layer of technical difficulty that you add to something, it drains the life from it. It drains the spontaneity from it. And so getting to bake that kind of improvisation or extemporaneous feeling stuff into something that will then have, $100 million VFX budget poured into it to make it, to fully realize it is my favorite thing to do. And then also it combine that component of finding something in the edit that actually enriches the performance that you got that was not what you planned, which is basically how we created the other side of the conversation. We found it's audio from the, I think it's from the sequel, Stitch Has a Glitch, the sequel to the original movie. Because when we were editing, Chris Sanders is reprising his role as Stitch, but when we were editing, we can't just call it. He's a busy dude. We can't call him. We have to save all that recording till the end. And so whenever we needed Stitch's side of a conversation, we would just go into the archives and pull out little bits. And so making that scene feel like a true back and forth in the edit, seeing it come to life in the edit like that, when I'm editing something like that, and it goes from being dead to, a few hours later, it feels so alive and crackling with energy. That's my favorite stuff.
Amazing. I also want to ask you about the special effects in the movie, because they're very innovative, not just in terms of how realistic things look and the use of light and reflection and things like that, but just in terms of the sort of geography of things, the choreography of stuff. There's a battle towards the end, without spoiling too much, but it reminded me of the video game Portal, where characters are like going down one place and then they pop up another place.
Yeah.
The sort of slapstick aspect of that, using VFX to have that impact is great to see, because you're not just using it as an excuse to make things look cool. You're doing
Yeah.
So I'm curious about kind of how you approach the kind of insane toolbox at your disposal when doing a film like this, especially since you hadn't before.
Mm-hmm. I think it all comes down to finding that core group of people, the department heads, who you can share a shorthand with, that you have, early discussions with, that like you feel like that person gets the idea, gets what we're going after, and then empowering them to bring their A game, essentially. But I think because it's such a huge apparatus, and ILM especially is just like, I don't even know how many hundreds of people work there. It's like a village, small city, and they're doing all these massive projects, and so it is. And they're a bit of a black box because they're in the Bay Area and also distributed in Australia and other places, and we're in Burbank and Hawaii. So there is a certain level of figuring out the workflow that is like difficult and probably really boring for your audience for me to talk about. but I approached it the same that I approach, Marcel or anything. You have to go from a place of story first as much as possible, and comedy first, and all those things. It can quickly spiral out of control and out of all good sense if you are just doing things because you can or it looks cool. And then I also think that in terms of how to execute that, like you were mentioning, like the choreography and stuff, I was pretty adamant that we always had things on set that represent, Stitch, and that we actually try to do the choreography of him knocking over objects live practically as much as possible. And sometimes you end up doing those things, and then the visual effects folks will still have to take over something and create it digitally because the lamp fell over at the wrong moment or whatever. Right. But it still curbs your fancy, and 100 other people that touch the movie. It still curbs your fancy in a really powerful and helpful way to have things done practically. The visual effects people, if they do have to recreate it, they have reference for what that object should look like exactly in that lighting. You have the actors, for example, are then going to be reactive to something, because even if it's not the main point of the scene, we all have little flinches and reactions to things, just because we have spatial awareness, and you can tell when those are missing, and it makes Stitch or whatever the visual effect is feel slapped on top. And then also, I think for Maya and the other actors, it was really important to me that we have something to represent Stitch at all times and not resort to like a tennis ball on a stick, because I don't know if you've seen your own face when you're looking at a tennis ball on a stick, but it's really not not much to look at. It's just flat and dead. And even when so that there was not sort of a one size fits all solution. That was like we used, I don't know, probably a dozen different kind of tricks to do that along the way. But the main ones were we worked with Legacy Effects, who are incredible, to create this very lifelike puppet. And one of their puppeteers and the guy who fabricated the puppet actually came to set and operated it. At first we weren't going to have him on set, but then he sent us a YouTube video of like how to operate the puppet, and it's like so mind-bogglingly complex that we were like, all right, when can you get to Hawaii?
I want that puppet.
Yeah. Oh my God, the puppet's amazing. And then some of the time it was, like I said, Maya's acting coach, Sarah Arrington, would be, she'd have a Luma Key hoodie on, like a gray hoodie onesie thing that she would put on so that we could paint around with shots. But along the way, I realized pretty quickly how envious I was of movies where the CG effect is at least as big as a human, like Paddington, because you can actually have an actor just be on set to represent Paddington, whereas Stitch is the size of a dog, so we had to keep shoving poor Sarah into smaller corners of the room or whatever, so we don't have to paint her out of everything.
Right.
And that was mostly for like emotional scenes when we're like really in there with Maya and Stitch. And then we sometimes had a dog named Dale, who is in the movie. There's 2 shots of him in the actual movie. There's 2 shots at the beach where there's a French bulldog on a surfboard. That is actually Dale, our Stitch double, who we hired because he could surf. But then he had that hustle in him, and he got promoted to Stitch stand-in. But basically, he's just like a totally untrained dog who could just kind of create ambient mayhem when we needed him to. I was very focused on always trying to have something there for not just Maya, but myself and the crew. Everyone's perception of the scene and their job changes when they're reactive to, another thing on set. So that was important.
That's amazing. So last thing I want to ask you is about having gone through all this, where this leaves you. I mean,
tired.
Tired, sure. I was thinking more creatively, but I'm sure tired is also an accurate description. I mean, I enjoyed Fraud. I've enjoyed and I wonder, so you make something that's really kind of off the beaten path, and then you make something that's sort of this unexpected breakout, and now you've done a studio movie with a very recognizable IP and all kinds of resources. So how has that sort of influenced your expectations in terms of, where you're heading as a director now?
That's a good question. I think I'm motivated by characters. Marcel, obviously, I co-created, so that was a big, kind of my baby. And Stitch, it's probably always been my favorite Disney animated movie. And I just think he and Lilo are just like such amazing, iconic characters that I wanted the opportunity to work in and play in that world and learn from the people who created it, something that I'm such a fan of. And then I'm also motivated by sort of like technical boundary pushing in a way that can, sort of like I was saying with the like improv editing formula, that can breathe life into things cinematically in a way that people haven't seen before. So I try not to think of it in like, obvious buckets like that, or this is my studio movie, or this is my indie charmer or whatever. But I don't know. I'm going to follow wherever my heart takes me with those two things as my guide. I definitely probably will not immediately jump into doing like another big IP adaptation.
I was gonna say, I mean, there are so many possibilities on that front floating around. So
yeah,
maybe you need a breather. Well, thank you for doing this, and
of course.
very excited to have this film shared with our audiences.
Yeah, me too. I hope they enjoy it.
Yeah.
You'll have a blast.